With the help of Hashem, we are learning Sukah Daf Yud Tes. We left off 7 lines from the top of the Amid. We are in middle of the machloikes between Abaye and Rava. In a case where you have the porch, the achsadras that are surrounding the homes, and we're focusing on the inner part of a courtyard. And the Mishnah taught us that case as an example of doifen akuma. If the roofs are less than 4 amas from the walls of the house, then you rely on the walls of the house. The moment the roof is 4 amas or more, you don't have the doifen akuma, then the Mishnah said you cannot just place chach. However, there is a machlokes Abaye and Rava according to the first version, which is what we learned in the previous daf, that if the roof is thick, a tefach, if the roof is, and the schach is placed above the roof, so it's visual, you can see the edge, you can see not only the bottom of the roof, but you can see, so to say, the wall of the roof, then you use this new din that we have been learning about called pi tikra yored v'soisam, that the edge of the roof extends down and it mamash seals it off, and you have yourself a bona fide kosher sukkah. We're going to have another version of their machlokes, and ultimately, just to know halachically, we're going to follow the first version, and we will paskin like usual, like Rava, because Abaye v'Rava halachik Rava chutz miyal kigam. Now we're going to have another interesting case. Today, whoever has pictures will benefit by looking at pictures, and I hope with God's help to be as clear as I could, even those who don't have it to understand. The Gemaras are very easy. You just have to see in your mind or physically a picture. Guys, if you remember that when we learned the halacha of a lechi by a mavui in Eruvin, then there is a lechi that is visible whether you are inside the alleyway or whether you are on the street. There is a way of placing the sidebar in a place where if you are outside you can see it, but it can be placed in a way where if you are in the inside of the mavui, the lechi doesn't narrow the passageway, it's flush, you cannot see it. Is such a lechi valid? And we'll see, yes, it's valid. And because of this gavaldik leniency, that a lechi by Hilchas Shabbos is going to be functional, even if it's not seen from the inside, as long as it is seen from the outside. Similarly, we're going to have a very unusual type of sukkah that was built, that the reason why we will consider it kosher is because from the outside of the sukkah, there was a beam that was visible, as we'll speak out that case. Now, there's another important braisa that was quoted above, and at least when we quoted it, we were vague, but we mentioned that how we applied the braisa is not always. The words of the braisa is psal, hayotzim and asukah nidoin kesukah. Psal means schach, right? As we had above, one of the limudim of schach is that it has to be from the psoiles of goyden and yekev, but psal means schach that is protruding outside the sukkah. Nidoin kesukah is a good sukkah. We're going to have many understandings of that statement of the Braisa, and every understanding obviously will limit it somewhat. And then we're going to go on to various Mishnayos, and we're going to have the Mishnah that's speaking about a sukkah that's like a conical hut. It's a sukkah that its walls and roof merge one into the other. If halachically we don't consider the roof to be a roof because you cannot separate it from the wall, then there's a machlokes tanoim whether it's considered a roof or not. Similarly will be if you have a wall that's slanted. You have a wall that's standing and you have a wall that's slanted. Now there is obviously a third wall in the back. Same issue of, since the wall and the roof are all the same, can we view that area as a roofed-in area or not? A machlokes tanoim. And finally, the final Mishnah on Daf Yutes, which is something that we will begin, God willing, to be continued on Daf Chav, is when it comes to reed mats. And weiter mats. Reed mats, especially the large ones, are very hard and they are not comfortably used for laying on. And therefore, the question ultimately will be, when such a mat was made stam without a clear designation, do we say, it was made only to afford shade which is a good thing when it comes to Hilchos Sukah, because anything, it's pshutei klei eitz, that means it's wood, it's flat. If it wasn't made to hold, whether stepping or whether laying or whether holding, if it was only made as a roof to provide shade, then it's not makabel tuma, and therefore it's kosher schach. However, there might be a difference that if you have relatively smaller reed mats, the definition of small is that it's a mat whose length is the average height of a person. Machlokas Tanoim, here it's more problematic. Here, perhaps, even though we don't know for what intent it was made, we should presume that it was made for people to lay on it, and therefore it's something that's makabel tuma, and therefore it's a type of mat that becomes invalid to use as chach and chevra and much, much more. We left off again on Daf Yutes Amud Aleph. We are 7 lines from the top of the Amid. The Gemara says that everything we learned until now, beginning with Daf Yud Ches, 2 lines, bottom of the Amid, the Machlokes Abaye and Rava, is only the way this Machlokes was quoted in Surah, that Besura Masni Lo Hashmaitza B'Hai Lishna. However, in the city of Pum Bedisam, they had a different record of the Machlokes Abaye and Rava. Wow, and listen to this. And how did they learn that Machlokes? Sichech al gabe ach sadra she'ein lo patzimin. According to the latter version, if you don't have columns, then everyone holds its puzzle. Why does everyone hold its puzzle? For the reasons that we mentioned in the previous year. Even though when it comes to Hilchas Shabbos, when you have an achsadra bebika, so Rav and we paskin, like Rav says, that you are allowed to carry underneath it. There isn't a single physical wall, because there is a concept, halacha l'Moshe Misinai, known as pi tikra yored v'soisim. However, everyone agrees, pi tikra yored v'soisim is only said if the roof, whose edge you're using as a wall, was made for the area underneath it, and the wall that you are creating is to encircle the area inside of it. The wall is for the same area of the roof. Then it works. Everyone will hold that in our case, where you have a courtyard, and true, in top of the houses, ground floor, you have these protrusions, you have these little roofs. If the roofs are 4 amas or more away from a home, then no one will say that even if the roof is a tefach thick, which is what you need to say pi tikra yored v'soisim, no one will apply it. Why? Because the roofs were made to provide some sort of protection for the areas underneath it. Similarly, the same roofs were made to be like a porch for the areas over it. But that's exactly not where the sukkah is. The sukkah is beyond it. The sukkah is not in the same area. No one will say that. Where was there the machlokes? Now this is a big chiddush. Even if you have petzimin, even if you have columns, even if you have pillars, and chevra, we're speaking about pillars that are within 3 tefachim one from the other. And did we not learn until now lavud? No, here there's a machlokes even whether you say lavud. Abaye says kosher, and Rava says psula. Abaye is simple. Abaye says kosher because we're speaking about pillars that the open space in between them is not 3 tefach. It's less than 3 tefachim. Of course, you say lavud. Did we not learn this so many times in Eruvin, right? A caravan is going in the field, and they want to encircle their camp. They don't even have to build proper walls. They don't even have to do lattice walls. They can just have either strings that are horizontal or strings that are only vertical. Many people use this now for their sukkah. We learned so much about it, and if in between every string you have less than 3 tefachim, as long as you hit the height of 10 tefachim, you got yourself a halachic wall. Why would this be different? I'll tell you why it will be different. Rava says you don't say lavud. That's Rashi quoting the sugi we had in the last year, because you know when you say lavud, and the example that I gave is that when you are building a halachic wall around an area, you are encircling it. You're only putting posts. So here we say, that if in between each post is less than 3 tefachim, lavud. But here again, the pillars were not made for the open courtyard. The pillars were placed to add safety to the roof. The pillars were placed to give beauty when you enter. I don't think it's just for beauty, because 3 tefachim, you can barely squeeze your way through there. It's to support it. But it's to support the area under the roof. So therefore, you can't use lavud for the area outside of it.
1 second. In this case, let's say you didn't have 3 tefachim. or you added extra pillars to make it less than 3 tefachim.
Okay, so before we went between this class and that class, for those of us on Chabad.org, since we're learning them together, so our Gabbai just pointed out, theoretically, that if the roof, according to the last sugya, was built for the Sukah area, then l'choira, since we paskin like Rav, that says pitikra yored v'soisim, yes, we paskin like Rava should agree that it's okay. And similarly is pointing out the same thing over here. If we're learning Gemara Rashi, according to Rashi, for sure, not halacha. According to Rashi, the problem is only because the pillars were made for the area under the roof. If the pillars were made for the Sukkah area, I'm confident that this is taka halacha l'maisa. Then of course you got yourself a bona fide wall. Lavut. Now, says the...
It would still be the issue of Gediyim, no? Even if it's 3 tefachim?
No, less than 3 tefachim, Gediyim don't fit. Not horizontal, not vertical. Okay, now, says the Gemara, it's important that the halacha is kalishna kama. Rashi points out, we know Abaye and Rav halacha kirava. But it's important to say halacha and kalishna kama because what the Gemara is saying is that if you have petzimin, so that goes back to your question, Danny, even if the petzimin were made for the area under the roof, according to the first version, everyone will be lenient by lavud, allowing lavud to create walls for the sukkah area. There's no machloikas about that. It's only where you don't have any petzimin, even though Abaye is still lenient, but we paskin here like Rava. Right. Rav Ashi once found Rav Kahana, the kom mesachech al gabeach sadra she'ein la petzimin, and obviously it was roofs that protruded 4 amas or more away from the home. So Amar Lei, so Rav Ashi challenges Rav Kahana, Loi Savar Lon Mar Hada Amar Rava, that only Yesh Ba Petzimin Keshenim, Ein La Petzimin Pesulim, and therefore, my friends, and we paskin like Rava. So here, before we go on, here it's very helpful to have a picture, and there was a very unique sukkah that was built. So I'll do my best to describe it verbally. So you have a house, and it has this roof. Many houses today, you have a little roof that protrudes outside the house, or if it rains and you're looking for your keys, and that roof is 4 amas or more. When Rav Kahana built a sukkah, he built 2 walls. He built two walls as a right angle. They were outside the area of the roof, so if you are standing inside of it, you're open to the heavens. Problem is, you're missing a third wall. Now, the width of the pillar was a tefach. But the width of the tefach of the pillar was not inside the right angle, it was right outside the right angle. And evidently, Rav Kahana, so what Rav Ashi thought is that Rav Kahana is relying on Pitikra to create the third wall. That's what he thought. He for sure was not relying on the pillar because the pillar is not visible if you're standing inside the sukkah. And that's why he correctly challenged him that we paskin like Rava. And Rava is saying that since the roof was made for the area under the roof, not for the area outside the roof, there is no pitikra. Truth be told, Rav Kahana knew that. What Rav Kahana was doing was he was being machadash something amazing. He was saying that the pillar had a tefach width. The pillar touched the right angle, but it was completely outside of it. You cannot see it from the inside. Yet, it's still going to be used. Where did he get that from? So, Achaveilei, Rav Kahana showed him, you're not seeing something. And here he quoted the halacha that we have when it comes to the lechidin. So again, you have a closed alleyway. Closed means it's closed from 3 sides. Midrabanan, you have to put in front of it, in the area that separates the alleyway, the cul-de-sac, from the public street, you got to put, one option is to put a side post. There are times that you put a side post that are not seen from inside the movie, they're only seen from the outside. And by the way, you can have it both ways. So he's quoting the halacha that if it's only nira bevafnim, you can only see the side post when you're inside, even though it's shava mibachutz, even though it's flush on the outside. If someone is outside the alleyway, they don't even see it. And the or is what's negeya here, inami nira mibachutz. If it's only visible from the outside, if whoever's looking at the screen, that's the picture to the right. It means even though it's shava mibafnim, nevertheless that lechi serves as a lechi, and you can carry in the mavui. So Rav Kahana was machadesh to do the same thing by a sukkah for the third wall, for the one tefach wall. The itmer, as we learned, I'm recording here dinner that we had in the Sechtes Eruvin, nira mebachutz v'shav mibafnim. That's the chiddush. In other words, even though when you are inside the alleyway, you don't even notice that there's a lechi, nevertheless, nidain mishum lechi. And Rav Kahana showing him that post, he declared, our version is v'lechi hainu petzimin. Rashi actual, look inside the Rashi. Rashi's girsa is, and v'hainu petzima. In other words, there is a column. I know there's only one column, but the column, mamish, touched the right angle. Even though it's not visible from the inside, it's good enough that it was visible from
Rabbi,
the outside. Yes.
can you just clarify this one tefach column? How is that being considered a third wall? Are we using the pitikra from the
No pitikra.
We're saying that it is even though it's not in the sukkah, it's somehow extending into.
You don't have to extend it. Yeah. It's as if it's a third wall. It's a third wall to the sukkah.
Meaning today we say a third wall needs a certain minimum shiur, right?
Says the Rosh, very good, Danny. So says the Rosh, since we say that the third, guys, Daf Zion, not only says the Rosh to add, but the way we learned, we quoted the Rosh Shita, the way we learned the Gemara, that even with a third wall, if it's only going to be one tefach, you have to have, in addition to the solid Eitzuras HaPesach. And the Rosh learns that the whole story is that Rav Kahana made a Tzuras HaPesach. But only a Tzuras HaPesach without any solid is worth nothing for a third wall. So Rav Ashi thought he's relying on the Pitikra, and that was the Gevaldik Chiddush of Rav Kahana, that I have the one tefach. The one tefach is outside the sukkah, but it's flush, it's nira mi bachutz, and I can use that with my Tzuras HaPesach to affect a third wall. So says the Rosh in our Gemara. Okay, weiter. Let's move weiter. Now this Braisa was quoted above, and it's amazing how many different ways of the application. They all share a common theme, that this din should not be used universally. It's used sometimes. So Tana, this is what the Tana said. Psal hayotzeh min hasukah, that if you have some kosher schach that goes beyond the sukkah, nidain kisukah. Nidain kisukah, which means that you are allowed to use that schach and eat underneath it, and sleep underneath it, and dwell underneath it. Now the Gemara says, whoa, not always. My psal hayotzeh min hasukah. What's the case of the Braisa? I think we have over here 4 different understandings. Amarullah, number 1, kanem hayotzim la'chayre hasukah. Sticks, pasha the way it sounds, there are sticks that are protruding, that are extending beyond the sukkah. And that before the picture, the Gemara says it can be that. Because if underneath that excess of schach, you do not have walls, it won't be good according to Ula. According to Ula. You have to have 3 walls. So Ula says, yeah, the price is saying that you do have 3 walls. That was the picture we had up before. Now guys, you're going to ask a question, so what's the chiddush? No, there's a big chiddush, because those walls was because the guy who built the sukkah was someone like me. He didn't know what he was doing. He built the sukkah for the area in the picture further away. Happened to be that the walls were sticking out, and the middle wall is, it's good for both sides. So there was no intent for that area. But since the poyel mamish, you have schach on top, that's the way you'll understand it. Hold on. You have to have the minimum size sukkah. Even though you have 3 walls, it has to have 7 by 7. Yeah. Says Ula, we're limiting the Braisa more. The case of the Braisa is b'de'ika. In that area. In that area, you need to have more shade than sunlight. Well, if that's the case, then what's the whole point of the Braisa? So the Gemara says, well, according to Ula, the chiddush of the Braisa is, the tema, you might have thought, since the walls were made for the interior. Now you understand why the Gemara links one sugya with the other. Because according to all of the versions that we had, Surah and Pompedisa, we differentiate for what area was the roof made for, or for what area were the psimin made for what area were the walls made for. The walls were made for the inner part of the sukkah. It was not intended for you also to have a side, cheder sheni, on the other side. And therefore the schach was not placed there, b'chlal, it was placed on the other side for schach. Ulabaroi lo yavida. And let's not forget, guys, that putting down the schach, yes, we paskin like Beis Hillel, it doesn't need to be l'shem mitzvah sukkah, but on the other hand, it has to be l'shem sichoch. Here there was no intent. It was just excess. So that's the point of the Braisa, that even though it's just excess, the intent that you had for the inside validates the schach, and by default, that kashrus will spill over. But you have to have three...
Intent of the walls or
intent of the schach? The walls and the schach, and both here. Everything. No, you didn't build it for there. Tenth of everything, Danny. Next. Now, whether Rabba, you can learn the Gemara over here, that all of these opinions, one argue with the other. Could be. Because all are really limited, this Bryce. Rabba also qualifies it, but much less. Let's go right. Rabba and Abi Yosef. The Amri Tarvayu. That you know what the Bryce means? Hachem. Bekanim, hayotzim, lefnim in a sukkah. The sticks are protruding to the front of the sukkah. Again, if you have a picture, so you have a sukkah, the walls end, and the schach goes weiter, but you are facing the same direction. That will be a great picture. And, 1 second, it's not that there are zero walls. No, even according to Rabban Abi Yosef, it would not be good. But, one of the walls extended more. I want to add again about kavana. Guys, 2 walls and 1 tefach is enough. 2 walls and 1 tefach is enough. But here, the extension, there was no kavana for that. The kavana was you wanted to have proper 3 walls. Shlamazel, 1 wall was longer than the other, so you used a longer wall. The schach ended up going further. That's the part. So now the tema that what? Ha leis ba hechsher sukkah. So Rashi writes, different ways of learning Rashi, that if the area in the front doesn't even have 7 by 7, and if you were to look at it as a separate sukkah, it would not be kosher. So Kamash Malan, that we consider it adjacent to the sukkah from where it's coming from. The schach over there is kosher, so we extend it, and we halachically consider even that extended area as an area that has 3 walls. The one physical wall that's touching it, the other wall at the end, and then you have the 3rd wall to the side. Another understanding. Rabba Bar Chana says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that lo nitzracha elo lesukah sheruba tzilasa meruba mechamas. You have more shade than sunlight, but in one part, in one section, umeyuta, on that one little section, you have more sunlight than shade. So the tema you would think that the entire sukkah should be pasul. Now let's add what many Rishonim say. If you have a large sukkah, then there's no havamina, because we're looking at the sum total. If in the entirety of the sukkah there's more shade than sunlight, it's good. Here, according to Rashi and many others, we're speaking about a sukkah that has the minimum size of 7 by 7. The minimum size of 7 by 7. If we were to discount that little circle or that little area where there is more sunlight than shade, then you don't have 7 by 7. And then the pshat would be the whole sukkah is not good. Not only, we're not discussing, according to Rashi, the area under the sparse schach. We're speaking about a sukkah who has a minimum size. If you discount this area, it has garnished. So you would think the whole thing is pasul. Kumash Malan, no. That we get to view the sukkah as one entity, and the sukkah has there's more in the whole sukkah. There's more sunlight and shade, and you're good to go. According to the first 2 interpretations, the word yoitze means physically that the psal went out, went to the back, went to the front. Here it's all within the walls. So how do you touch the word yoitze? So explains the Gemara, it means yoitze mehechsher sukkah. It departs the law of sukkah. The sukkah has to have tzilasa meruba mechamasa. In that area, you don't have that law. It departed from that law. Next, weiter. Rabbi Oishia Amar, a 4th understanding. Loy, that the case of the Brais is nitzracha elo lischach pasul pachus mishloisha. You have a strip of pasul schach. Guys, we had this 2-3 daf ago. Yes, we said that unless you have 4 tfachim of pasul schach, it does not separate the sukkah into 2, but that was only speaking about a large sukkah. a large sukkah. Here again, we're speaking about a sukkah that has exactly 7 by 7. And by the way, we also had this before. If the sukkah is exactly 7 by 7, if the pasal ischach goes all the way across 3 tvachim, not 4, 3, it's invalid. Not because you divided the sukkah into 2, but because you don't have walls. It splits the sukkah. You don't have the minimum shiur. You don't have the minimum shiur. So that's what he's saying. That if you have schach pasal pachas mishloisha and it's besukkah ketana, so says the Braisa that psal hayoytzim in asukah. Hayoytzim means again, o my yoytzim yoytzim mitoyda sukkah. You would argue that that the sukkah doesn't have the minimum size. So the din is that if it's not 4, it's amazing. No, it's less. Since it's less than 3, even though you don't have 7 by 7, the sukkah is going to be kosher. But if it's 3, guys, remember, then the sukkah will be invalid, not because it's split into 2, because there already we don't say psala yitzim in a sukkah. There we say that the sukkah doesn't have the minimum amount of schach. Okay, I don't understand. Lo yehi ela avid. Well, why would invalid schach be worse than avid? We had beautiful words above that avid is a more potent invalidation because it invalidates with 3. So it cannot be more chamur than ear. In 1 second. And va'avid pachus mishloisha tfachim besukah ketana mi pasel. And we know it doesn't pasel. So why would you even think that if you have pasel ischach less than 3, why do you even need to have a brayso that say that it's kosher? So Amal lei Rabbi Abba, I'll tell you why. Because zem, when you have our case of this interpretation of the brayso by invalid material, not only is the sukkah kosher, but you can actually dwell underneath the pasel sukkah, the pasel ischach. The yeshenim tachtov. But v'zeh, if the problem is open air space, which is taka more problematic. True that if it's less than 3 tfachim, lavud will not invalidate the sukkah, but you will not be allowed to dwell underneath the gap. V'zeh mitztaref, but ve'ein yeshenim tachtov. Wow. Now that's already gavaldik. In other words, let's go in our case, that when you have invalid schach, since it's not 3, not only does it not separate the sukkah, but it actually combines to the kosher schach, meaning you are allowed to eat, to sleep, to dwell underneath it. And that will be a huge novelty, because what we are saying is that you have something that is invalid, and it's going to be used as valid schach. So says the Gemara, do we find this in any other case, where it's tarufei mitztaref, that we use it to combine and to create kosher schach, even though it itself is not valid? So Amalei Rab Yitzchak ben Eliyashiv, yes, we do find it in one other case. And where is that? Daf Yotes Amud Beis, when it comes to the din of a mikvah, that we know that a mikvah has to have 40 sa'ah of waters that are not mayim she'uvim, meg shamim, and we have Mishnayos, including the din of tit hanoroik, which means pourable mud, meaning mud, that is mud. If you would make this mikveh out of this mud, you would not become tahor. But if it's liquidy enough that you can pour it from one keli to another keli, and it's not a mikveh made only with this type of mud. Mud, by the way, is a mixture of water and sand. It's made out of proper meg shamim. And you add it to a tit hanorik, but here's the chap. You did not have 40 saw of kosher waters. You need to use the tit hanorik to get to the minimum shiur. We use it. Tit hanorik yerchiach. Shemetztaref la'arboim sa'a. Even though if you would only have this type of mud, even though it's pourable, nevertheless, and mamish the same thing over here. This chach is puzzle. Since it's less than 3 tfachim, we don't consider the sukkah to have less than the 7 by 7. This chach is puzzle, doesn't matter. Not only doesn't it not matter to invalidate the sukkah, you can actually dwell underneath it. And that's the pshat. The fourth pshat that we learned in the Braisa, that Apsala Yetzim in a Sukah is Nada in Kisukah. Let's move on. Beautiful. Next Mishnah. Daf Yutes Amid Beis. Says the Mishnah. You built your sukkah like a conical hut. If you have a picture, if not, just push it. It's a hut that it's not wall and roof, but the walls merge into the roof. Or it's not from all of the directions. You have a proper wall. That's the conical hut to whoever sees the picture. Or case number 2 is that shesam chalakoisel. You have a proper vertically standing wall, and adjacent to it, you lean a second wall. Now, guys, we all know that a sukkah has to have 3 walls, so the case will be is that you have like a right angle, you already have 2 standing walls, and you put this leaning wall all the way at the end, so you have a wall to one side, you have a wall in the back, and this leaning wall is like the 3rd wall, but here the issue is that you don't know where the wall ends and where the roof begins. So the machlokes, Rabbi Eliezer says, Poisel. In both cases, why is that mipnei she'ein lo gag? Because the roof is not distinct from the wall. However, the Chachamim are machshir. Says the Gemara, Tony, we learned in a Braisa that even Rabbi Eliezer who's machman will be moidem with great chidush. That she'im higbi emanakaka tefach. This goes to both cases. That if either the conical hut is not resting on the ground, but you have a base, and the base is straight, going up only 1 tefach. Guys, a sukkah needs to have 10 tefachim height. I don't care. Here it's enough for it only to be 1 tefach. So that 1 tefach will be considered a straight standing wall. And 1 tefach, like we learned in the halachas of Tumah by Tumas Meis, also means that everything above it will be considered a covering, a oil that will taka be choitzitz. Now, on the other hand, the sukkah has to have 10 tefachim height. You have 10 tefachim height. The only reason why Rabbi Eliezer invalidated both cases is because Rabbi Eliezer holds that since you cannot distinguish between roof and wall, you don't have a roof. But here, you can argue that the whole thing is a roof. On the other hand, you can't argue the whole thing is a roof because you have to have 10 tefachim height. For that, Rabbi Eliezer will hold it's good enough. Let's go back inside. Or another exception to his chumrah. Now, this second exception can only go on the second case. It doesn't go to the first case, but in the leaning wall, it's not leaning mamish at the wall, but you have protruding horizontal little pieces of wood that go out of the wall. They go horizontal, and now this leaning wall is leaning against it. Now that again is 1 tefach. So here again, the whole problem is because the roof is not distinct. Here you have yourself a distinct only 1 tefach. I know. The whole wall is the schach. The wall is the schach. The wall is made out of a material.
In this case, if it's protruding from the wall, wouldn't that make the protrusion the roof and then the slanted part?
Of course not, because the sukkah has to have 7 by 7. In both cases, but by hilchas sukkah, that's a big chiddush. The roof is not 7 by 7. In the first exception, the pegs on the ground are not 10 tefachim. Doesn't matter. For that, Rabbi Eliezer will be moided to the Chachamim, because in the area you have a 10 tefach height and a 7 by 7. The problem is only that you can't distinguish between wall and roof. As long as you can call it for any din roof, then everything else is okay. Now, my tamayu de rabbanan in our Mishnah that they are machshir, because they hold that even though it's shipua oihalim is keoihalim. Sloping roof is a roof. It's called a roof. Now, guys, we're going to compare one case to the other. A perfect fit, a perfect shidduch. If you remember a few daf ago, we were learning the sugya of even if you have a kosher sukkah, if you are in the sukkah but in an oil, in a tent, commonly the beds that they built, there were different types of screens that they would put on top of it. If it was a 4-post, and therefore there was a gag to that type of canopy, so then according to many, the oil makes a chatzitza between you and the sukkah. Now, what did we learn in that Mishnah? That if it's a canopy that doesn't have a tefach of a roof, then it's not problematic. Now, l'cha'ira, that cannot be l'shitas chachamim, because the leniency of the chachamim here is predicated on shipua oiholim, yes ki oiholim. If it's yes ka'oihalim l'cha'ura, then sleeping in a canopy, even if it doesn't have a gag of a tefach, l'chachamim, it should be problematic. In reverse, Rabbi Eliezer, that's machmir over here. Why is he machmir over here? Because he says, if you can't distinguish, if you cannot discern between wall and roof, then it's garnished. Well, that will create a leniency that you should be allowed to sleep in a canopy. And ironically, Abaye once found his teacher Rav Yosef, the Kogoni Bikilas Chasanim Besukah. He was sleeping, Bikilas Chasana means it wasn't a 4-post canopy. It was only a 2-post canopy. But as we just explained, 2-post canopy, L'cho'ura, should only be good according to Rabbi Eliezer. The problem is that why would we paskin like Rabbi Eliezer? First of all, Yachid Karabim, Malachi Karabim. More importantly, Rabbi Eliezer Shamuti. Amalei Kaman Rabbi Eliezer, Shavak Rabbanim Avada Rabbi Eliezer. So the Amalei, the Gevaldigkeit of Rabbi Yosef was, after, so to say, he lost some of his memory, that Rabbi Yosef knew that the way Rabbeinu HaKadosh recorded our Mishnah is wrong. Not wrong, but there was a machlokes in later Tanoim regarding this machlokes Tanoim. And Rabbi Yosef's version was like it is in the Braisa, that Braisa Ibchatani, Rabbi Eliezer is the Machshir in our Mishnah. The Chachamim are Poislim, which is great. So now fakir the Chachamim that are Poislim, because the Chachamim say that if you cannot distinguish between the roof and the wall, it doesn't have a din of an oil, that now becomes the leniency by the canopy. It's not called an oil. So it doesn't create a chatzitza between you and the sukkah. But here again, if you have to choose between the girsa of a Mishnah versus a girsa of a Braisa, so shavakt masnisim v'adike Braisa. So for that, Omar Lei says Rav Yosef to his student Abaye, Herzachain. Yeah, azoi state in the Mishnah. But let me tell you that the way our Mishnah records this machlokes is only the opinion of one. And we don't follow one. Who's the one? As we'll see, the Tana Rabbi Nassan. The Tanya, ha'oisa sukasik means srif. Oisha sam chalakoisol. It's Rabbi Nassan that says, the way we have it in our Mishnah, that Rabbi Eliezer is the poisel and the Chachamim are the machshirin. That doesn't contradict. That just means that Rabbi Nassan, that's the machlokes. And the Rabbi Yosef accepts that which the Braisa says, and therefore our Mishnah is only das yichida, and therefore really the majority of the Tanoim held that the opinions are reversed. Yes, we do not paskin like Rabbi Eliezer, which is why we, are allowed to sleep in a kilas chasanim. All right, moving on to the last Mishnah of today. Very simple sugya. Again, we're speaking about a reed mat. We're going to have two types, a large one and a small one. The definition of small is the length is the height of an average man. And the definition of large is much larger. And as we're going to have, just to know, there's going to be many different approaches to the Mishnah. But the underlying nakuda is very simple. Even though a mat made out of reeds is wood, and when it comes to flat woodware, they're not makabel tuma, and therefore they should be valid for schach unless they're 4 tfachim wide, gezeiras tikra, if you're going to subscribe to gezeiras kelim. But let's just go to it's not that wide, and therefore it's going to be kosher as long as the mat was not made for a mat for people to stand on, nor it was made for a chair, nor it was made for a hammock for a bed. Now, reed mats are hard, and therefore there is a svara to say that unless you know otherwise, it was not made for people to lay on it. It wasn't made even as a mat. It's not comfortable. It's hard. So that's the issue. The issue ultimately, the way we'll learn today. I'll give the first step, the first approach of the Mishnah is that both by big and by small, if we know the intent of the manufacturer, or if the owner already designated something, then that designation will be of tremendous influence. The question will be if it was stam. And let's read it inside. Marcelis konim gedoyla, large reed mat, hard, not comfortable for reclining. Yet, says the Mishnah, that if he made it l'shchiva, I don't care that it's pshutei kleitz. If it was made for people to recline upon, that's called, it was made to be in service as a receptacle. It's makabel. People are going to be on it. Makabel Tuma. And therefore, ve'ein mesachachin ba. On the other hand, now that's the difficulty. The Mishnah seems to be saying, if it was made l'sichuch, if you know it was made only to provide shade, then mesachachin ba, because ve'ein mekabel l'stuma. And whenever a Tana words the din in such a way, so we are familiar with the Gemara of the inherent implied contradiction. Because the Reisha is implying that only if it was made l'shchiva is it problematic. Mashma, stam is okay, right? And the latter statement that says that if it was made for sichuch it's okay, implies that if it was made stam without any designated intention, then it's not going to be okay. We're going to resolve that in the Gemara. However, Rabbi Eliezer argues. Now, obviously, to understand Shitas Rabbi Eliezer, you have to understand the Tanakh. So we'll just read the words. Then we'll clarify today, at least first step, what is their machlekes. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, it's not about Konim Gedoyla. Now, what is Shitas Tanakh by a smaller reed mat? Small meaning it's made to the height of a person. We'll see in the Gemara. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, achas ketana, va'achas gedoyla, they have the same halacha. Not like the Tanakh that differentiates. And what is the same halacha? If it was made l'shchiva, so therefore it's mekabel tuma, and therefore you can't use it for schach. If it was made, again, what he's saying, if it was made l'sichuch, so then you could be mesachach. Why? Because it's not mekabel tuma. Frek Gemara, again, whenever you have these two sides, and each side is telling you, like this, it's bad. Like this, it's good. So the implication of both, it contradicts each other. Hagufa kasha. Tanakama. What's the pshat in the Tanakama? Omrat, you begin by telling me, that's the first line in the first case in the Mishnah, by the konim gedoyla, by the large reed mat, that if it was made l'shchiva, it's mekabel tuma and ve'emesachachem ba. Okay, what does that imply? Tamad asal l'shchiva, which means, l'chu'ura, that hastama, if there was no express designation, then we can presume, like we said, because since it's large, and that's going to be the approach of today, and it's hard, and it's not comfortable, unless you know otherwise, you presume that it was made l'sichuch. Problem is, how do you read the next line in the Mishnah, in the Tanakh? L'sichuch, if it was made l'sichuch, then mesachachim ba, ve'ein mekabel l'stuma. Which again, l'chura, implying, tama da asal l'sichuch, but if it was made without any intended designation, then it's l'shchiva. So answers the Gemara, loy kasha, that in the Tanakh itself, even though the Tanakh did not speak about konim ketana, only Rabbi Eliezer did, he's already hinting to it. Kan b'gedoyla v'kan b'ktana. The first part of the Mishnah, it says beferish gedoyla. And guys, it's gavaldik. In other words, by gedoyla, stam, we can be lenient. Gedoyla is only problematic if it was made l'shchiva, because gedoyla is that much more uncomfortable. From the size of the mat, see, the size is implying that it was made to lay upon, because why? People would, if they would only make something l'sichuch, they would make it larger. Making something in the height of a person leads you to think it was made for a person. And indeed, if it's ketana, only if you know it was made l'sichuch, right? Then mesachachin bo. Very good. Now says the Gemara, well, that fits. We can read the parentheses, l'Rabbanan. But how do you learn pshat in Rabbi Eliezer? In other words, why does Rabbi Eliezer arguing with the Tanakh? The Tanan, or you can skip the parentheses. That Rabbi Eliezer, I'm according to the Mishnah, achas ketana v'achas gedoyla, if asol l'shchiva. See, he's writing clearly, by both. If it was made for shchiva, mikabel stuma ve'emesachim ba. Same thing, same kasha now. What does that imply? Tamad asal shchiva. Both by big and by little. Hastama, shitas Rabbi Eliezer, l'chu'ura, we can say it was done l'sichuch, which is good, which is lenient. But ema seifa, the next line of Rabbi Eliezer, asal l'sichuch, only then mesachachim ba, because it's not mikabel tuma. So here again, what does that imply? That tamad asal l'sichuch, hastama l'shchiva. You can't answer what you answered above. Here Rabbi Eliezer is saying clearly, achas ketana va'achas gedoyla. So Elo Amar Rava, approach number one. Very important. Indeed, bigedoyla kula alma lepligi destama l'sichuch. Why? Because it's not comfortable, and it's large, and it was common for people to make those reed mats for sichuch, for shade, or today maybe for partitions, not for it to be makabel anything. And when will you invalidate a large mat? Only if you know it was made l'shchiva. And no one disagrees with that. Ki pligi, where is there a machlokes Tanakama and Rabbi Eliezer when it comes to a small mat that has the size of a human being? Tanakama holds stam kitana l'shchiva. The Tanakama is a machmer. And Rabbi Eliezer, that's the meaning of Rabbi Eliezer. Achas katana v'achas gedola. Really, you should have said it in the opposite way. If that would be the meaning, you should have said achas gedola v'achas katana. But we'll see that tomorrow in this year. Then it says no, Sarah, that katana nami l'sichuch, and therefore it's going to be kosher. And let's read it inside Daf Chof, just at the top of the Amid. V'hachi ka'amad. And this is how we read the Mishnah, guys. We are reading the Tanakama. That machzeles hakonim gedola. Here, it's invalid only when it was expressly made for reclining. If asal l'shchiva, only then is it mekabelas tuma, and therefore ve'emisachrim ba. And indeed, good. Time of asal l'shchiva. But a large mat, hostama, we say nasis kemish asal l'sichuch, and therefore misachrim ba. And according to Rava, Rabbi Eliezer agrees. Let's go weiter. Ketana. Now, we're going to go with the Marshal who takes out these words. And there's reasons for that, but we're late. So we're going to follow the gears of the Marshal, but just to say it by heart. But in contrast, by a small one, the Tanakama holds that even if it was not made for any expressed intention, halacha says if it's in the height of a human being, then we do say it was made also for reclining. Tanakama, machmer, keli, makabel tuma, pasal ischach. And let's go after the parentheses. No, achas katana va'achas gedola. We always will say, that's Rava's approach, that if it's small, stama, even though it's stama, Rabbi is not comfortable. It was made for a shade. They made a smaller shade. They made a small mechitza. It's still going to be ksheira l'sichuch. Rabbi Eliezer, which is a chiddush. And tomorrow we'll take over 8 lines from the top. It's a beautiful sugya, and we're going to have questions on it, and there'll be other ways of understanding our Mishnah, God willing, to be continued.